Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, to tuning into this Ivy webinar today with me. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tara. I work with Ivy, and we're the leading software and community for interior designers. And designers use Ivy to create and send proposals and tear sheets, invoice clients online, track and bill for hours, and tasks on the go with our mobile apps, and POs to vendors, manage FF&E schedules, and more. But every Wednesday, we actually host a webinar for designers to learn about the different ways that you can manage your business more efficiently and more profitably. And today, I'm very excited to welcome lighting company Soraa to the Ivy webinar stage. Soraa Home is new, but Soraa's professional line is not. Soraa Light can be found in some of the world's most elite museums, high-end retailers, and luxury hotels. They really obsess over color and pride themselves on making light that can make a home really come to life, just like the use of natural light. So today, we're really lucky to have Soraa's Chief Product Officer, TJ Graywall, and Chief Science Officer, Aurelian David, to discuss how to use light to bring atmosphere and emotion to life in the spaces that you design. And specifically, TJ and Aurelian will discuss the problem with LED light in your designs, what can make light feel soulless and what to look for to avoid that from happening, why the CRI scale is the wrong way to select light, how the slight differences in color temperature can make a big impact on the spaces that you design, and why including budget for bulbs is super critical to making your designs unforgettable. So in terms of the format of the presentation today, Soraa will be presenting for the next 45 minutes, and we'll address all of your questions at the end of the presentation. And for those of you who are designers and not yet using Ivy, I highly encourage you to stick around for after the presentation, where my colleague Risa can jump on and walk you through the Ivy software to show what Ivy's all about. So without further ado, I'm happy to welcome TJ and Aurelian of Soraa. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So as Tara mentioned, you may or may not have heard of Soraa, but you've absolutely been in Soraa Light. So whether you've been in various museums or your favorite museum that you enjoy, high-end retail, high-end hospitality, hotels or restaurants, or fashion shows and fashion houses, that's predominantly where Soraa Light can be found today. And it's really found there for one reason, and one reason alone, which is Soraa was founded on the idea that LED light can be made to be beautiful, can be a true replacement for halogen light, and can represent colors correctly. And that's tremendously important, and that's why we're excited to talk to you today, because when we think about this community as interior design, we think of you as artists. You're curating spaces, you're deciding on what materials and fabrics a client should use, the form and function of the items that you're putting into a space. And so you spend a lot of time and effort in that process, and color is a strong part of your palette. But what we see, and I've seen this just even as a home renovator and builder type thing, is that very little attention gets paid to the actual conversation of what light bulb goes into the fixture that you just chose, right? Or what light goes into the rest of the space. And when that decision is just left to others, typically that decision is not contemplated very much. And that decision can dramatically change the effect and the emotion that you want to create in your environment. So, so from our standpoint, that's really what we believe, which is that light can make a big impact, right? We want to help support you in satisfying what your goals are. For example, the time and effort that you spend with a client on just looking at fabric swatches, or what the palette of a room is, or what art you select, that needs to be re-represented when you leave your studio and the final space is being defined, right? And so we're strong believers that color is critical in your application. What we hope you learn from today is just how critical it can be, and then some tricks about how to evaluate what good light truly is and why, and then how to select light for the future. So At this point, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague here, Aurelian David. Aurelian is our chief scientist. So there's a lot of science that goes into determining how to create correct colors and correct light. And so he will lead you through that.
Thank you, TJ. So this is just a very quick summary of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about a few important things to understand light and how it influences your interiors. First, I'll say a few things about what we call natural light and its spectrum. And then we will discuss the color of a light source and, most importantly, the color of objects, interior objects illuminated by a light source. And in the end, we'll discuss in practice what that means for you and how you can select a light source which will be respectful and faithful to your interiors. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about white light, and as you probably already know, white light is composed of a variety of colors, right? We know that, for instance, when we look at rainbows, where we see daylight being decomposed into a variety of rainbow colors. So this slide shows you another example of that, white light entering a prism and being separated into its different components, the colors of the rainbow. So people who care about light care about what composes white light, because obviously if you want the objects of your home, of your interior to be well lit, you need to have a light that comprises these colors so that the colors of objects look nice. So I'm going to start with a little bit of technical vocabulary, but don't be intimidated by this, right? It's going to be very simple stuff. When we talk about the colors that make up a white light, we like to use the word wavelength. The wavelength is just a technical term for the specific colors that make up white light. And the way we like to think of white light is we like to see what it is made of. And so this graph here shows you an example of what we call a spectrum of light. And what this plot shows you is very simple. It just shows you, okay, this is daylight in this example. And you can see that daylight is composed of a very smooth and even mix of the different colors of light, going all the way from violet to blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. So if you were to look at daylight through a prism, this is what you would see, this very smooth and even distribution of different colors making up the white light. Now, as we know, natural light changes throughout the day. And by natural light, I mean the light we've been exposed to for tens and hundreds of thousands of years and we've been accustomed to. So this is the light that our vision system is suited for. So this is a picture showing you the cycle of natural light throughout the day. And as you know, it changes color and it changes the ambience of the space around us. And if we try to express this in terms of spectra, this is the kind of spectra we obtain, right? So these are just simple examples which show you what morning, midday, and evening light look like. So from this, you can tell that morning light tends to be more rich in blue wavelengths and less rich in red wavelengths. Then around midday, we have a more even spectrum of light, which is the one we already looked at. And then by the evening, things reverse, and we tend to have light which has less blue and more orange and red, which create this warmer feeling, right? So the important thing is that all these forms of light, these flavors of light, which I'm going to call natural light, are the things we're used to. So we're used to these different spectra of light, and our eyes adapt to this throughout the day. So obviously, when we want to make artificial light, we would like to replicate these natural lights because this is what we like to see. Now, when we talk about light and color, there are two really important things to talk about. The first is the color of the light proper, and the second is the color of objects illuminated by the light. So the color of the light itself is, for instance, the color of a light bulb if you just look at the light bulb directly, or maybe if you don't want to blind yourself, you can just shine this light bulb on a white wall and it's going to have a tint, and this is what we call the color of the light. And then next to that, we have, of course, a lot of colored objects in an interior. And these objects, their color is going to be influenced by how they are being lit. So obviously, having a good or a bad light bulb in an interior is going to affect how objects look like. So In the following of this presentation, we're going to talk more about these aspects. Now, to get in a bit more detail, if you're going to select a light source, a light bulb, there are three really important quantities that you need to be mindful of. And we will spend the rest of the talk discussing these, right? The first one, which we'll talk about in a minute, is the color temperature of the light, and this pertains to the tint of the light source itself, the color of the light. The second important aspect, which we'll talk about after that, is the brightness of the light. Of course, as we know, having different levels of brightness in an interior can really create an ambience from something that's more quiet and loungy to a very bright space, so this has importance. And finally, maybe the most important topic for us is going to be the colors of objects, because what we really care about is that all these beautiful objects that you have selected for an interior be respected by your light source. So we want nice looking objects, and as we will see, the concept that covers that is called color fidelity. All right, let's start getting into details. So as I said already, the first thing we should worry about is how does the light proper look like? So this is a very nice picture which gives you an idea of what different lights look like. It's quite similar to the other picture we saw a bit earlier with different forms of sunlight. Of course, this is with light bulbs now. And you can see that you can find a variety of light bulbs having very different tints of light, going from very, very warm yellowish. So at the very left, this is what candlelight would look like. And then going on from there, we see what more typical incandescent and halogen sources would look like. And then towards the center and the right of this picture are examples of what sunlight and skylight would look like. So there is a number which has been used to describe this feeling of having different color tints of light. And the technical name is color temperature. And the numbers you see on this picture from 1,000 to 5 and 10,000 give you examples of what different color temperatures pertain to. So to give you a bit of an idea, about 3,000 is typical of what is used in most interiors in the United States. We call it warm white, and that's what incandescent light tends to generate. So many interiors will be generally lit by this kind of color temperatures. That said, it's worth mentioning that in some cases you may want to consider going to a cooler, a higher color temperature to create a very crisp daylight effect. And some other countries, for instance Japan, tend to have a preference for different color temperatures. It's not rare in Japan to have interiors being lit by 4,000 or even 5,000 color temperature, which creates more of a daylight effect. So again, color temperature is important because it really influences the ambience of your interior and whether it looks more warm and cozy or more crisp. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about color temperature. Now, I'm showing you what looks like a very technical graph. Don't be intimidated by it. This graph is just showing you kind of a map of the different colors, the different tints that a light can have. So all this graph is telling you is, hey, a light source can be red or blue or green. And for instance, if I'm somebody doing stage lighting, I might want these very colored light sources. Or near the center of the graph, we have light sources which are white looking. And this graph is showing you a few specific examples. So the three dots you see are examples of different natural lights, candlelight, incandescent, and daylight. And you see how they are placed across this diagram showing the colors of light. So candlelight tends to be more towards the red, yellow shade. And then as we move towards daylight, we move to a more bluish tint of light. So this intuitively corresponds directly to the picture we just saw. What's important to notice is that all these flavors of natural light that we like follow a specific line on this graph. So you see this black curve that's labeled natural light. That's the locus of all the flavors of natural light we encounter. And so obviously, when we make a light bulb, whether it be fluorescent or LED, we would like to replicate this natural light. So we would like to make a light bulb which has the same tint, which falls on this natural light curve. Now, here is an example of how things can go bad, okay? And this is kind of an extreme example. This is a caricature showing you where a low quality LED bulb might land on this graph. And what you see here is if you don't do things properly, the color of the light can be completely off. So here what happened is somebody tried to make an LED bulb which mimics an incandescent light, but they did a poor job at it. And as a consequence, the color of this LED light is off from this curve of natural light, and it's off towards the yellow direction. So clearly that's something that isn't wanted. It's going to give you a very weird looking interior, which is going to have poor light color. So this is, lesson number one. As interior designers, you have to worry about lighting your spaces with good quality light. And the first aspect is you need to make sure that the color of the light itself is not off from natural light. And I will say that very cheap low quality manufacturers may give you this kind of difficulties, but high-end manufacturers will not have this issue and will give you natural looking light. All right, the next topic we're going to talk about is the brightness of a light source. Obviously, it's very important to have the right level of brightness, again, to have a more quiet or more energizing ambience. The trick there is that for many, many years, we've been used to talking about how bright a light bulb is based on watts. We were saying, well, this is a 40, 60, or an 80 watt light bulb. And there was a direct correspondence between how many watts of electricity it consumed and how much light it emitted. But this doesn't work anymore because today we live in a world where we have energy efficient light bulbs, especially LED bulbs. And so it's very common to have a 10 watt LED bulb emit as much brightness as what a 60 or 80 watt incandescent bulb used to do. So clearly we can no longer talk in terms of watts because watts are no longer indicative of how bright a light source is. So the solution is to use a different word, which we call the lumen. Again, it's a technical term, but the lumen is just a number which tells you how bright a light bulb looks. And so just to give you an idea, typical Edison bulbs might emit 600 or 800 lumens or even 1000 lumen. So this is something that we need to get used to, transitioning from talking in terms of watts to talking in terms of lumens, which describes more accurately how much light a given light bulb gives you. I don't want to talk for too long about lumens, but I want to make one important point, which is that, of course, people think they want high lumens in general, that they want a bright light source, but sometimes having high lumens can be to the detriment of the quality of your light. So I'm just going to take a minute to explain why this is the case. The graph you see here is a graph which shows you how our eyes are sensitive to different wavelengths of light when it comes to feeling brightness. And to put it simply, what this graph tells you is that our eyes are very sensitive to yellow and green light. And so if I want to design a light bulb which has a very high score on lumens, the way to do that is going to emit a lot of yellow and green light and little blue and little red light, because our eyes do not detect blue and red wavelengths as being very bright. And so the problem is, if I want to design a light source which has a lot of lumens, it's going to lead me to neglect these very important wavelengths of light, including violet, blue, orange, and red. And these are very important, not necessarily for the feeling of brightness, but for the feeling of having nice colors. So the message here is, be careful. Some people will try to sell you light bulbs just based on how many lumens they have and how bright they are. And this can be deceiving. If all you favor is lumens, it means you're going to be giving people light sources which have poor color quality. And I just want to put a little bit of substance on this. So this is a simplified image which shows you a very colorful interior with a lot of brightly colored objects. And the upper right hand of this photo shows you what it would look like under natural light. And the lower left is an example of what it might look like under a bad light source, which has a lot of lumens but has poor color quality. You see how a lot of the colors look dull and washed out? And so this is the risk you have if all you think about is lumens. So at this point, I'd like to get into the meat of the topic, which is the color of objects, right? As I just showed you one slide ago, bad light sources can be bad for the colors of your interior. And as interior designers, obviously you spend a lot of time selecting beautiful, colorful objects. And the last thing you want is for a light source to wash out these colors and spoil all the hard work you did. So I'm going to spend the rest of this presentation talking about how light sources can affect the colors of objects and what quantities you can look at to make sure that isn't the case and to make sure that you're selecting a light source which is going to be good and respectful for your interior. So I'm going to start with a little bit of vocabulary on the colors of objects. And this slide shows you names which you are probably familiar with, right? If you've opened a Pantone book of colors, you've seen these terms before. When we talk about the color of objects, there are two important quantities to describe the color of an object, hue and saturation. So the graph on the left shows you what hue means. Hue is just what happens when you go, quote, across the rainbow from red to yellow to green to blue and back to red. Okay, so it's kind of the color wheel. And then the other important quantity is saturation. When you go from a less saturated to a more saturated color, what that means is the color becomes more colorful, more rich. It goes from a dull color to a very vivid color. Okay, so these two names, hue and saturation, are the two quantities which we use to describe how the colors of objects are. Okay, so now let me give you an example of what can happen when a light source messes up with the color of an object. And I'm going to give you a few scenarios that you might want to be worried about. So let's consider a tomato, and I'm going to say, okay, this is the natural color of this tomato. What do I mean by that? I mean, if we put it under, for instance, sunlight, this is what it would look like. So this is its natural color. So now let's assume I selected a specific light bulb, which is not respectful of colors, and it could distort the color. Several things could happen. In the first scenario, you might have a light bulb which is going to make the tomato look more red, more saturated than it really is, right? Now, in the specific case of a tomato, and if you're in the business of selling produce, you might say, hey, this is a good idea because my tomato looks riper. But in the case of interior design, this is something you probably want to avoid because you've selected objects based on the natural colors under sunlight, and so you don't want your light source to be modifying that. Now, another probably even worse scenario is other light sources which can in fact make colors look more dull. So we call this desaturating because the saturation of the color is going down. And clearly this is something that's very unpleasant. If you have selected a nice colorful object, you don't want it to be dulled out by your light bulb. And just like a light source can mess up the saturation of an object, it can also mess up its hue. So here are two pretty strong examples where the hue of our tomato is being affected. Some light bulbs may make the tomato look more orange, in which case it would look like a persimmon, and other light bulbs might make it look pink, in which case it looks very weird and unnatural. So again, this is kind of a worst case scenario I'm showing here, right? But I'm showing you how different light bulbs can really, really mess up the colors of objects, and this is something that in general you want to avoid. This is a very important concept. The question, do colors look natural, is a central one in color science. And because it's so important, a lot of tools have been developed to answer this question. So the general name of this concept is called color fidelity. Color fidelity is just a technical term which means, do colors look natural? So when you talk about a light bulb, a high fidelity light bulb means a light bulb which is respectful of colors, and a low fidelity bulb is one that will cause one of these effects on the colors. Okay, now we're going to start talking about numbers, and I'm going to explain to you how we put numbers on color fidelity. And why it matters is when you buy a light bulb, you are at some point going to have to look for a score. You want to see what score does my light bulb get on color fidelity. Many of you have probably heard about the color rendering index, and I will talk, or the CRI, I'll talk about this in a minute. So in general, the way we evaluate color fidelity is we just look at how specific colors are being distorted. So here's an example. On the left, we have selected a reference color. It could be, for instance, a patch of color from the Pantone book. And we illuminate it under reference light, under natural light. So for instance, under daylight. And it gives us a specific color, which is the one we want to respect. Then we consider the light source that we would like to evaluate. For instance, an LED bulb. We take that same Pantone square and we illuminate it under the light bulb. And we see that it has a different looking color. So we put the two colors next to each other. We look at the difference in color and we put a number on this difference. So we give a score to 100, a score of 100 if the two colors are exactly the same. So a fidelity of 100 means you cannot tell the difference between your natural color, daylight, and your artificial color, LED bulb. On the other hand, if you start seeing a difference, the score is going to go down from 100. It could be 90 or 80 or even below. And the larger the difference in color, the lower the fidelity score. Now, there's a lot of calculations that go behind this, but at the end of the day, what matters is lower scores mean more distortion from the natural color. So that's the general concept of how we quantify differences in color. Again, you may have heard about the CRI or color rendering index. It's the number that's the most well-known when it comes to describing color fidelity of a light source. And so it's a concept that you should be familiar with, because some of your clients, if they've heard anything about LED bulbs, they will probably have heard about color rendering index. So it's important that you have some idea of what the CRI means. Essentially, the CRI does what we talked about one slide ago and just repeats it with a few different colors. So you see here the 8 colors that the CRI considers. So these are standard colors that have been selected once and for all, and they are the 8 basic colors used in the CRI calculation. So we take these 8 patches of color, and just like we did before, we illuminate them under natural light, and we illuminate them under our LED bulb, and we do a comparison for each. And for each patch of color, we get a score, which can be 100 or 80 or 50, and then we take an average, and it gives us an average score, and that is what the CRI is. So the CRI really tells you one thing. It tells you are colors being distorted. If you have a CRI of 100, it means that all the colors look perfectly natural. You have no color distortion whatsoever. If the CRI score goes down, it means that some of the colors are being distorted. So obviously, if you want a high fidelity light source, which is going to be respectful of your interior, which is going to make colors look nice, what you want to look for is a high CRI score. To give you an idea, average quality bulbs today have a CRI of maybe 80, and good quality bulbs will have a CRI of 90. Very, very high quality will be a CRI of 95. And when you reach 95, you're very close to natural light. Now, the CRI has some shortcomings. I'm not going to get too technical, but obviously the CRI is only looking at 8 colors. And as you can notice, they are pretty pastel colors. And so this is missing some of the reality of our world, which is that an interior has many, many shades of colors, much more than 8, and they are much more colorful than this. And so by not considering more colors, the CRI is sometimes missing some details. Let me give you an example of how the CRI can fail. As I just said, the CRI tells you whether there is color distortion caused by a light bulb, but it doesn't tell you what type of color distortion is happening. So these 3 photos are giving you a scenario of a grocery store illuminated by 3 different LED bulbs. On the left is an LED bulb with a perfect CRI of 100, so completely respectful of colors. And so the photo on the left is showing you how the natural colors of all these produce look like. On the right, I'm showing you 2 examples, respectively dull and saturating. So what's important here is you can see these 2 photos look very different from each other. One has pretty dull colors, the other has very bright colors, yet their CRI score is the same. It's a CRI score of 80 in each case. How is that possible? Well, it's possible because the CRI just tells you there is color distortion. So In both cases on the right, the colors are different from the natural colors from my original photo on the left. Of course, they are different from each other, but they get the same score because the same color distortion is happening. So this is telling you how the CRI can be misleading, right? Sometimes it's not giving you the right type of information. It's not telling you what you want to know. So the one thing to keep in mind is a very high CRI score is usually good because it means natural colors. But as soon as the CRI score becomes low, you don't really know what's happening. And so this takes us to other color metrics, right? Because the color rendering index is not perfect at giving us an answer, lighting people have developed a lot of new numbers to describe colors. Now I want to talk about two really important examples of other numbers that can be interesting for you to have a nice interior. And I'm going to focus on these two, which are red and white. So I'll explain in a minute why these two quantities matter. Let's start with red. People care about different colors differently. A lot of studies have shown that warm colors are the ones that people notice the most in an interior. By warm colors, I mean red, orange, pink, and also skin tones. People are very, very mindful of the color of their skin. They constantly look at themselves. And you've probably all had that experience of entering a room with low quality light, for instance, fluorescent lighting in an office, and your skin looks weird. You look like you're not very healthy. So people are very, very perceptive of how red and other warm colors are being rendered. Now, the CRI does not do a good job at describing red color rendering, and that is simply because the 8 test colors that the CRI considers ignore red. They ignore skin tones. So the CRI is not very well suited to tell you how these warm colors are being respected. Luckily, there is a solution. There is another number than the CRI. It's called R9, so that's kind of a weird name. But R9 is the number you want to look at if you want to know about red and warm tones. And it works pretty much like the CRI, but it is specific to warm colors. So this photo shows you an example of what R9 means. On the right, you have an example of a high quality light source, which has a score of 100, which is the maximum score you can get. And you see that in this case, all these fruit here have very nice, rich colors. And so that's what a good R9 gives you. It gives you pleasant, warm colors. On the left, you see an example of a bulb which has a lower R9 score. And you can see that the reds appear more dull, less saturated, and so obviously it would be less pleasant. To give you an idea, a really bad R9 score would be 0. An average score might be 50, and a really good score would be 90 and above, right? So just like for CRI, you want to aim for a high value of R9 just to make sure that all the warm colors in your interior are going to look nice. The other color that's very important is white, and that might sound surprising to some of you because sometimes we tend to think of white as an absence of color. But of course, if you think about it for a second, we all know that there are many, many shades of white around us, and especially in an interior, there are many different white objects with different tones of white. So this slide shows you a few examples of what different white objects we have around us. For instance, you can have a china or a plate, which often is going to be of an off-color white, a bit cream, not too bright. And then our teeth, of course, are white. They're a pretty bright white. And then there are objects that are even whiter than our teeth. For instance, fabrics, including shirts, but also sheets and so on, curtains. And paper can be a very, very bright white. So in a typical interior, if you look around you, you will find that you have a lot of different shades of whites that are present, and they all look different from each other. And the contrast sometimes between a cream white and a very bright white right next to each other can be a very pleasant experience. So the problem is that just like LED sources can distort colors, they can also distort whites. And again, luckily, we have numbers to describe this and to make sure that isn't the case. So here's an example. This is a real photo showing you the difference between two LED bulbs. having respectively bad rendering of white and good rendering of white on the right. So if we focus on the right half of this slide, you see how the different white objects here have different tones. We have a sweatshirt that's kind of creamy, and then a shirt which is very bright and white, and the wall in the background is kind of in between. On the left, on the other hand, we have a situation where all these whites look exactly the same, and so there isn't any pop, there isn't any nuance in the different shades of white. So if you want to know if a light source is respectful of your whites, the number to look at is RW. Again, this is a number which, just like CRI and R9, tells you how good or how bad whites are going to look. And as usual, a score of 100 is good. It means that whites are being natural and all these shades of whites are respected. And then an extreme of 0 tells you that all the whites look exactly the same and look very dulled out. Now, this is pretty important because many LED light sources actually have an RW of 0. So the situation on the left is what you will get with the vast majority of LED bulbs on the market. And obviously, if you have an interior which has different shades of whites, you're going to really slaughter them with that kind of light source. So something to be worried about, make sure that you select a light source which has nice white rendering. I'm going to end this discussion, this little tour of quantities to describe color, with something that's a little bit more advanced and technical, and I'm just going to spend 2 slides on this. So as we said, CRI is an imperfect quantity to describe colors, and in particular, it is because it only considers these 8 pastel patches of color to estimate color fidelity. So there has been a lot of research to try to fix that. And so there are more modern ways of describing color fidelity which try to upgrade the CRI. And one of them, which is fairly recent, which was only released 3 years ago, is called TM30. I'm not going to go in too much detail, but for instance, it's important to know that TM30 improves on the CRI by adding a lot of colors. Okay, so on the left, you see the 8 patches of color that the CRI considers to tell you about color fidelity. And on the right, you see what TM30 looks like. And you see that TM30 considers a lot more colors with different hues, different saturations, and obviously is going to be much more representative of the variety that you will find in an actual interior. So when you do a calculation with TM30 as opposed to CRI, you're going to get a more accurate answer because all the colors are being faithfully considered. To wrap things up, I want to give you just a quick example of the kind of information you can get from TM30. So this is a slightly more complex slide, but it's probably the last one that's going to be technical. So let's go back to the example we considered a few slides ago. We had that grocery store, and we had an example where we had natural colors in it. Okay, so CRI 100, TM30 100, colors look like natural colors. The way, or one of the ways that TM30 describes this is with what we call the color icon. And so the color icon is this graph you see below the photo. And in this case, what you want to look at is the shape of the black curve. And this shape, as I will show in a second, is indicative of how colors are being affected by a light source. In this example, the shape is a perfect circle. That corresponds to a CRI of 100, where all the colors are natural. So when the black line is a perfect circle, it means all the colors are natural, no distortion is occurring. Now let's consider our 2 examples on the left and on the right, with on the left a grocery store which has dull colors, and on the right a grocery store which has oversaturated colors. And let's see how TM30 describes these 2 scenarios. On the left, you see that the black shape, the color icon, is now being squeezed, it's being compressed. So instead of having a nice circle, we have a shape which is being brought in, and this is a representative of having less color saturation, so dull colors. And you actually see these colored arrows, for instance, the red arrow pointing inward. It's telling you, hey, red colors are going to look more dull under this light source. On the right, you have the contrary example of a grocery store where we put lights which makes colors more vivid. And you see that this is being conveyed intuitively on this color icon, where the black shape is now stretched outwards, which represents more saturation. And for instance, if you look at this red arrow, it's now pointing outward, which tells you, hey, red colors are going to be brighter, more saturated. So again, this is clearly more technical, but for those of you who really want to know in detail how a light source is going to affect color, TM30 is going to give you this kind of advanced information. All right, let me wrap up this tour of all the important numbers that describe a light source. I hope I convinced you that there are a few attributes of a light source that are really important because they can really affect how your interior is going to look in terms of ambience and in terms of colors. And so you want these numbers to be right so that your interior looks nice. And so the three quantities that are most important: first, the color temperature, which tells you the tint of the light. So it could be very warm for a cozy ambience. It could be cooler for a more modern ambience, for instance. Then we have the lumens, which describe how bright the light source is. And so you need to decide how bright your ambience is going to be and how many lumens you need for that. And finally, we have the color of objects, which we call color quality or color fidelity. And there are three important numbers that you need to remember when it comes to color fidelity. The CRI, which gives you a general answer about colors on average. R9, which specifically tells you about red and warm colors and skin tones. And RW, which tells you about rendering of white, shades of white. In general, if you find a light source which has a score above 90 for all three of these, CRI, R9, and RW, you can be sure that it's going to look very nice and very natural. With that, TJ, maybe you want to wrap things up?
Sure thing. Thanks, Roly. So, to close this out a little bit, I mean, I spend a lot of time with different individuals in different professions, and when we're working with lighting designers, so people who spend every moment of their day really thinking about quality of light, or they're curators in museums, etc., they have very technical ways of evaluating light and color and its fidelity, which we do not expect, other professions to really, go to that level of understanding. But there are short tricks and tips to use that can make, color evaluation easier. So one thing is obviously, to look at an object. So you will know objects that you're very familiar with and what they are supposed to look like. So like Aurelian used in the example, we all know what a ripe tomato should look like. And so that helps you understand, well, does it really look correct or not? The second most popular thing is really skin tone. And this is the one that I always tell people to, because you're very familiar with your own skin tone and those who you know around you, and you will almost instinctively know, does the light look right or not? And so that's important. Some tips about how you compare things. One is, don't try to compare things side by side. That doesn't work for our visual system in terms of how we interpret objects. And you're going to, it's not like a high contrast type experience that you want to have. And we call it light pollution. So for example, if you're trying to test a light bulb in a well-lit, sunlit room, you're really not going to be able to tell the quality of the light because you've got too much natural light flooding the room and the space around you. So another alternative you can use are grab a bunch of fabrics or dresses or whatever the materials are and compare them side by side, right? It's very, very rare if you grab 5 objects or 3 objects of the same color family that they were produced to be identical, whether it's 3 red dresses or 4 blue shirts or 5 pieces of or 5 objects that are made of white. So use these little tricks to kind of help you understand the quality of light, help your clients look at light differently, and then it's easier for you to make sure that all the things that you're selecting in your studios or in well-lit environments, like when you go to furniture showrooms, etc., that's going to translate well once you get back into the homeowner's home or the location that you've just finished curating. And so just the final slide, So these two walls here are the same color, but if you have different light on each one, they're going to look different. Now, this is a pretty extreme example. The combination between having good natural high fidelity color on one wall and poor fidelity on the other wall, but that can show you how much of a shift things can really happen. So with that, I'm going to hand this the opportunity over for questions with Tara, and then we'll happy to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This was an incredibly informative presentation. We have lots of interesting questions coming in, so thank you for that. I'll just go ahead and get started with some of the questions. So first, Sarah asked, in your opinion, what's the best way to go about budgeting for bulbs and lighting for a residential home?
Yeah, actually, thanks, Sarah, for that question, because I am always surprised how little time and effort is ever applied to it. I live in Los Angeles. I spent some time with a bunch of architects who build very expensive spec homes for prospective buyers, and they spend almost no time thinking about light budget. They might think about budget for lighting, but they always interpret that to be the fixture, right? So it's the fancy fixture that's in the dining room, or the things that are tremendously visible, but they don't think about the specifications of what's going into all the cans that are in the house. And then they leave that to the contractor, and the contractor is going to do exactly what you would expect them to do, is buy a 6-pack of bulbs at CVS and call it a day. In general, the rule of thumb from a budget standpoint is look for a dollar value per lamp or light bulb in the teens. So it's in the low teens if it's like what we call an A19, which is like the Edison light bulb, right, the normal shape, and it's in the higher teen range if it's a smaller halogen equivalent type light bulb like a MR16. That's the general rule of thumb to kind of be in. What you'll find is if you're doing homes, it does quickly add up because there's a lot of light bulbs in homes, but that's the general rule of thumb that I'd use if you're trying to budget for it.
Great, thank you. And as a designer who's sourcing and buying bulbs, do most bulbs have all of the info of CRI, R9, and RW on them, or do they have to kind of do their research and check directly with the manufacturer the bulb information?
Yeah, excellent question. And unfortunately, the answer is no. This information is not always easy to find, right? The reality is, if you're lucky, you will find the CRI value on the box. Some manufacturers show it, others don't even bother. If they don't show it, you can be sure it's not good. It's pretty easy, right? R9 and RW, which, as we said, are really important. I've never seen them written on a label, right? So unfortunately, for that information, yes, you will need to go check with the manufacturer, look at their website, find the spec sheet. So, feel free to start with Soraa. We have all these spec sheets which show you all these numbers. It's work, right? Obviously. And so at the end of the day, one realistic piece of advice is light bulbs are becoming more complex. We need to know more and more about them. And so brand is becoming important, right? Once you've identified brands that you like, that you know are mindful of color quality, you will know that you can trust their products, and you don't have to go check for every single product. And TJ is pointing out to me that Soraa does have this, right? So on Soraa boxes, we have all these informations. So you will find values of RW and R9. Yeah. But again, that's not common.
Yeah, so just a quick note on that. Because Soraa has a tradition of working with individuals who are very demanding of their light sources. So imagine a curator in a museum, right? They want to have artwork represented correctly. They get very, very technical with their evaluation of light and what metrics they really look at. And so that's the DNA that we have at Soraa, that we've been servicing that market, and that's typically who our customer is. And so as we've been expanding our footprint into more residential and more into commercial spaces, and not necessarily always going through that very high-end lighting technical specifier, we've been bringing this terminology out, and we're in the process of explaining it to people because, as Aurelia mentioned, it's almost always overlooked. You know, sometimes when I speak to people, they may know about CRI, and they think that they're very well informed if they can know about CRI, but in the grand scheme of things, they're usually ill informed.
Great. And Gretchen, she actually noticed that TM30 was not listed in terms of bulb info to look out for. In your opinion, is it important to look out for TM30 and why?
I would say it depends, right? It depends how advanced you want to be. If you're looking for simply a high color fidelity bulb, a bulb that's going to be respectful of colors, and if you select one which has high CRI, high R9, and high RW, in practice, you will be safe, right? So TM30 is clearly more advanced. If you're somebody who really, really wants to know more, and if you want to start playing with how spectrum influences colors, for instance, if you are seeking an effect where colors are being oversaturated, which some people actually intentionally look for, then you will need TM30. So my answer would be advanced users only, and mainstream users, you know, it's nice to know about it, but it's maybe not essential.
Great. Okay, and in terms of different problem areas in a home, maybe, for example, a closet or a bathroom that doesn't have any natural light, what is the best way to go about sourcing light for spaces like this?
Yeah, so the general rule of thumb is always have enough illumination, so have enough brightness in the room that you need it to be, you know, that you need, right? So you need a certain amount of light in order to feel good about brushing your teeth in the morning or kind of feeling to wake up, right? Or enough illumination in a dressing room or in a closet to see everything. So step one is always, do you have enough light? And so start there with how many light sources you have. If you only have one small light source in the middle of the room, you know, then your clients are probably going to need more, right? And then the next step is the quality of the light. So I know one of the very first places I put Soraa into our home was actually in our closet, because my wife wanted to see every one of her garments, you know, under correct light, right? So that's the general rule of thumb. It was like, first make sure you have enough light and enough light sources, and then the second step is make sure that it's high quality.
Great. Some other great questions coming in. So for example, living rooms that have tons and tons of natural light. Sometimes a client may, you know, step back away from wanting to invest in the proper lighting because they feel like the space is so well lit naturally. What's the best way for a designer to manage that conversation and to make sure that the client does invest in the proper lighting to make sure the space looks great at night as well?
Yeah, so speaking from experience, we have a glass house and it faces south. So our house is lit pretty much all day, as long as the sun is up, right? We have great light. But the letdown was always when it became evening, and that's when you start to realize that you do need light. And really where that comes down to is understanding how the space wants to be used, and then layering light into that space based on that use. So for example, separating how you might want to illuminate walls so that you get a sense of dimension in a space, and having, you know, that designed into the process. So there are, you know, lights that are closer to the wall, and what in the lighting world we call it wall washing. So you're washing the wall with light. So you introduce that dimension because you're going to lose that once the sun goes down. And then separate light for whatever activity you're doing. So if it's, the kitchen island, you want to have great light on the island. You want to have very little shadow, right? And present light there. In a family room, it really depends on your clients. I mean, if they really want it dim, then you don't have to worry about things like, are they reading at night or not, sitting on the sofa, right? But if they are, or if they want to use accent light to highlight the tables, etc., the challenge starts with light placement and then quality. So just the same answer as before, make sure you have enough light in the room. So in this case, enough fixtures or enough places where you're going to have light emitting, and then worry about the quality of that light and what capabilities you want to have to it. So for example, if you're washing the wall with light, do you or don't you want that to be dimmable, right? So some clients, we spend a lot of time in high-end hospitality, and wall wash is a very predominant way that, and sort of a trend that you're seeing more and more in hotels, and it's a different effect that they want, from your, what I'd say, awake evening hours from 6 to 10 p.m. versus post 10 p.m. where they want that light to really dim down and have really just be there for ambiance. So those are the things to kind of consider, even in a bright room, because they're going to live in that room once it turns dark.
Right. So I guess, yeah, it also comes down to asking clients the right questions in terms of how they're going to be using this space to be able to source light accordingly.
Yeah, and the thing there is, if you don't ask that question and you leave it to, let's say the architect, and let's say the architect is not very well versed in lighting or doesn't ask the question themselves, or you leave it to the contractor is going to resort to the city, your city code standards of how much light needs to be in a kitchen, how much light needs to be in a bathroom, and they're just going to be in autopilot mode, right? So they're going to say, okay, well, we've got a bathroom that's 16 feet wide or 20 feet wide. Code tells me I need to have a light source every 4 feet, and they will just pop it in, right? And what we found is they'll make those choices because they haven't been told to do otherwise, right? And so it'll just happen, and then you're dealt with having to deal with that situation on the back end, and that's where it gets really tricky, right? Because now you're prohibited with what you can do or can't do. So lighting design is tremendously important. If you go into like on the professional side, when we're working with lighting designers and specifiers, they're determining that during the pretty early architectural phase of how a space is going to be used. And so it gets set in stone well before walls are going up or electrical plans are being designed.
Right. Okay, yep. So I guess it's really important for the designer to get ahead of the game and ask these questions in the beginning of the project. It's also a great way to impress your clients at the start of the project, and then they can spec out accordingly.
Yeah, I think the key is always have your clients involve you, even when they might think of interior design as like, okay, well, now I'm going to speak to professionals who are going to help me fill the space.
Right.
But to really excel in what you do, you want to be involved in influence things like lighting very, very early in the process. And then they might not need to speak to you for a while because they're dealing with construction and other things, but you want to be able to have that influence very early in that process.
Right. Yep, that's a great point. Okay, we have time for one final question. We've had lots of great questions, but we'll just address this final question. Based on your knowledge, are there certain textures and materials that designers should look out for that are known for color distortion that will really require special attention in terms of lighting? So are there certain wood finishes or materials or paints or wallpaper materials that tend to distort that will require lighting to fix that color distortion?
Not necessarily so distortion. I think the the trick is always to understand the sheen of objects and how that will be played by and how that will be affected by light. So as Aurelian mentioned, right, the colors that we see in objects are really just a matter of light being reflected off of them. And so if you're going for a very natural look, but on, let's say, a wood surface, but then you have a very high sheen varnish that was applied to it, or a high sheen stain or method that was done to that, that is going to impact the color. So the trick is always to make sure that as you're choosing those surfaces, whether it's fabric or whether it's a hard surface, is to have finished samples of that as you're evaluating light, and then be able to see the reflectivity of it. And Aurelian's going to
maybe one more comment on that. You know, there's one object which you're not going to select, but is still always going to be present, and that's skin tones. Because as soon as you have an interior, you will have people in it. And whether it's conscious or not, people, as I said, are very, very sensitive to how their skin looks like and whether it looks healthy or not, right? So at some point, having a good light source really is about well-being. It's, of course, you know, you want the objects to look beautiful, but you also want people to feel good, right? And that one is unavoidable. Whether they know it or not, people will judge how they like a space based on how their own appearance looks like. And as I said, skin, to have a nice, healthy looking skin, you need a right amount of red in the spectrum of light. And that's why R9 is such a big deal.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Well, thank you, TJ. Thank you, Aurelian, so much for this presentation. I can see that there are tons of other questions, but we just don't have time for them today. But I know that people can email you with their questions, and Soraa is a great lighting resource for designers. So please, please reach out to Soraa for your questions. They are a great resource for you. Thank you so much for your time today, and we hope to see you sometime soon.
Great. We hope everybody found it informational. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you. And for those of you who are designers who are not yet using Ivy, I encourage you to stick around. I'm going to bring on my colleague Risa, who is going to share her screen and walk everyone through what Ivy is all about. Hi, Risa, we can see your screen. It's great. We just can't see. Perfect.
Awesome. So you should be able to hear me. Hi, everybody. Great to chat with you this morning. My name is Risa. I kind of manage all of our designer relationships and our events, and I'm very excited to be chatting with you this morning and be talking about Ivy. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right into the software. I don't think you can see me right now, but I'll pop in and show my face and answer questions at the end if you have any. So a lot of things that designers struggle with, and I used to run interior design business, and I talk to designers on a daily basis, and I think over the course of my career I've talked to hundreds of thousands of designers, and a couple of the biggest things designers struggle with is time management, organizing everything in a streamlined, beautiful central location, and getting together all of the pictures and the proposals and creating product libraries, managing all of your purchase orders, managing all of your vendors and your vendor contact sheet in one place. So the goal of Ivy is to really give you an easy, intuitive software to manage all of those moving pieces. So the first thing that I talked a little bit about is tracking time, and we just launched our app. For those of you, if you are staying on and you do use Ivy, hopefully you'll download our app. You'll be able to track your time on the go, and you'll just select the project that you're working on, select the service that you're providing, and then you can auto-populate it with your hourly rate. Even if you're not billing out hourly, you can still keep track of your hours. So if you ever get audited, you can have a log of all of this information. And then you can add in your description right here. And then you can start the timer, or you can just go in and log the amount of hours that you worked, totally up to you. And then from there, you can go ahead, log the time, and this will automatically save into the project and allow you to generate a beautiful, easy invoice to send your client. Now, a lot of designers will tell me, oh, Risa, I'm up till 2 o'clock in the morning doing my invoicing with Ivy. You have all of the time logged. There's no need for you to be up till 2 a.m. If you just click this little box right here, it will grab all of the uninvoiced time for you, and you can just click generate an invoice. And then with Ivy, you can actually go ahead and send this invoice out to your client, and you can ask your client for online payment. So you can take credit card or bank transfer. Credit card, the processing fee is 3%, and bank transfer, the processing fee is 1.2%. Now you can roll that into your markup on product, or you can charge the client the transaction fee, totally up to you, or if you want to take cash, do whatever you want. The nice thing with online payment, though, I do recommend is, one, it looks very professional, and two, the money just shows up in your bank account in 2 to 3 business days. Usually it's 2. So that's really nice. So let me go ahead and click preview so you can actually see what this looks like to your client. So it has your logo, your branding. You can have your own default memo on there, and then your client would just click pay now, and they would just put in their information, and the money would go straight into your account. So it's pretty quick and pretty easy. And that's great. Time billing is just one of the many hurdles you have to jump through on your daily basis. But a bigger hurdle I know a lot of designers struggle with is actually creating the proposals with images. So what we've created for you, another one of our designers' favorite features, is our Ivy Clipper. And how this works is, say, you know, I'm on my website, I have my product that I want to use. I can just clip the item. Do you see this little leaf, the little blue Ivy Clipper leaf? It will allow you to easily just clip the information directly from your vendor's website. So right here, I click the hand, and it allows me to grab the product. So I didn't have to take a screenshot. I don't have a messy desktop with all of these screenshots on them. It just saves right into my Ivy product library right here. And then I can clip my product title, my category right here, so I can select any category that I want. I can add my cost, and I can add my purchase fee. Now, maybe you know the retail price is $700, and you want to price below retail, so maybe I'll price it at $600. Well, Ivy will calculate that purchase fee for you. You don't need to do that yourself, so that's pretty great. And then what you can also do from there is you can go ahead and select your vendor. What I've done is I've actually selected all of my vendors that I had in an Excel spreadsheet, and I uploaded them to my Ivy account, and it saves all of my usernames and passwords. So you can do that too. If you're part of our community, you can ask one of the designers if they'll share their vendor list with you if you don't have a vendor list, or you can just start fresh. And then you can add in the description right here of the product, and then you can add it directly to a project. And I can add in the full product details here where I have my SKU, my manufacturer, my dimensions. Again, you see how I'm just clicking into the hand right here and clicking into the product. I'm not copying and pasting anything. Okay, so I'm going to save the product here, and it will save into my Ivy product library. It gives you confirmation of that. And if I go back to my Ivy account right here, I'm going to go into the project. And I can go into a proposal, and I'm going to create a new proposal. And in that proposal, just click create new. You see the item right there, the chubby ottoman. That's a funny name. And I can just click it right there. Now, it popped up right there because I saved it directly to a project as a draft. But if I want to search all of the items that I've already clipped in my Ivy account, I can easily just type in sofa, and all of those items will pop up right here, and I can easily add that in. Also, you can create custom items if you have your own picture and you're not clipping from a vendor's website. And you can save default services in here as well. And you can put your own cute little images in here, or you don't have to have any images as well. And then you can see on the item level, you have your name, the description, the image. You can add your cost, your purchase fee. The client, of course, will only see the total. You can add shipping. You can add a purchase fee on shipping. You can mark the item as taxable. or you can put tax on shipping if you want, and then you can add custom room tags as well. You can add your sales tax right here, and then you can also double check the total cost and your markup before you send this out to your client. Super helpful. I know this has saved a lot of designers a lot of human error mistakes, because we are all human, but if you just get in the habit of checking that every single time, that will ensure that you're making a healthy profit, and that will contribute to your overall gross profit margin. And then you can request a certain deposit. I personally like to take 100%, but you can plug that in by percentage or by dollar. And then you can add document tags as well right here if you want to easily be able to find those items. And once I save that, I can actually generate my own custom tear sheets. So these tear sheets are really, really professional looking. And honestly, I've seen a lot of designers kind of creating this on their own. It takes them so much time, and some designers that didn't know that this existed in Ivy, and so they've leveraged it into their architectural plans that they've created and made really beautiful packages for their clients, just kind of being consistent with their overall branding. So if I click this 3 dots and I click view tear sheets right here, you can view your tear sheets with pricing or without pricing, and it will just bump it out into PDF right here. It has the project name, the item, the description, and again, you can choose what information you want your client to see. You can make up your own custom name. You can plug in the pricing if you want them to see their pricing. You can show them the little purchase fee if you want. Totally up to you. So that looks really professional, and you can easily print those. And then from there, this is kind of what I was saying, when you go to the manage view, you can allow your client to see the markup percentage if you want, and you can also allow your clients to view this proposal by line item. So if I just click over here and I do a preview, you'll be able to see that this is what the client sees on their end. I enabled them to see the markup. Typically, designers don't want to show that to their clients, but it's really up to you. But just so you can see over here, this item gets really big and looks really professional. And of course, you know, I just really think if you're asking for clients for $10,000 for a sofa or whatever that number is, it really needs to be presented to them in a professional manner. And then the client can just approve or decline the item. It will update their costs, and they can pay you right then there on the spot. And you can also add an attachment as well, your contract, any addendums that you wish to add, you can do so here. And then once you get the money from your clients, you can go ahead and you can just click create a purchase order, and now your vendor will have this beautiful organized purchase order from you, which, trust me, I just was at a vendor studio yesterday. Vendors love it when you send them information in an organized purchase order, and this will help you keep track of your client expenses as well. You can just send that via email to your vendor. Also, plug in your estimated ship date, because little do you know, but Ivy will give you your project management, your plan, a calendar of when all of these things are shipping. We'll also generate a project tracker for you, kind of like your project schedule, which will show you a breakdown of everything that you have on order, and you can filter to however you want here. So that's really nice. And you can add custom items in here, and you can really see the overall update of how these items are tracking, what your install date is, any notes. You can see your side mark. Really, really helpful. And then you can, of course, download this in FF&E schedule. You can download it as an Excel. Ivy does all that work for you. No more manually creating anything in Excel. Now, Ivy does connect with QuickBooks Online. You can use Ivy as a standalone software if you're just getting started. You don't have to integrate with QuickBooks at all, but just remember that Ivy is really the project management side of things, and then QuickBooks does all of the accounting on the back end. So it's a one-way sync from Ivy to QuickBooks Online. More than happy to jump on a call to explain that in more depth with you. And I believe Tara will send you over a link to schedule a demo as well if you want just that one-on-one, because we really like to understand how you're particularly managing your business. Now, Ivy's used in a lot of different ways because a lot of designers run their businesses in different ways. One other thing I want to show you is the product library. So here, every time you save an item, you don't have to go to your email and find, oh, what's that item that I found when I was shopping in LA? It saves right here into your product library. You can access that link at any time. And it will, if you click the link, it will actually take you right back to that vendor's website. So that's really nice. It's just really streamlining and creating efficiencies for you to manage your business in a smarter way to help you make more money. And one other thing we do have is a Discover portal. Ivy is really big on community. Our Facebook group you'll get access to, and then we always have this community of network of service providers where if you're looking for maybe somebody to help you with 3D renderings and you really need to outsource, you can just log into here. These are all vetted through, these guys are all vetted through our system, and you can click on Kelly and she'll give you a discount if you're an Ivy designer. We have some vendors listed on our portal too. Sometimes their trade discount may be 25%, but if you're an Ivy designer, you'll get 30%. Relativity Textiles is a wall-covering designer that does that. So definitely there are a lot of perks to being a member at Ivy. I've just showed you a couple little things today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Tara to see if we have any quick questions from anybody.
Yeah. Yes, Lisa, thank you. We just have a couple questions. One, someone is asking, it takes them so much time to create, to manually create a proposal and then an invoice and then a purchase order. Can you please show them how easy it is to easily convert proposals to then invoices to then POs with just a click of a button?
Yeah, of course. So if I go into a project right here, you can see that I just created my proposal right here for you guys. And you always just have to look for the 3 dots in the right-hand corner. So let me click into this proposal. And then if I click, this is the proposal, it's red. It's created. And if I click that 3 dot, from there, I can start an invoice. And if I just click that button right there, some people just like to get approval on a proposal and then they like to get payment on an invoice. Again, some people take payment on proposal. It's totally up to you and the way that you manage your business. So see how some of the items were declined. That's why they dropped off of this. Now I can save this. And once the client gives me payment on this, let's say I received payment on the invoice, then I would just click create purchase order. Just like that, very easy. And then I can email the purchase order out to the vendor. Does that make sense?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. And someone else is asking, so I've been hearing a lot of talk about the Facebook group. And can you just share with everyone like some of the magic of the Facebook group and what are the types of questions we see designers asking each other in the Ivy Design Facebook group?
Great question. So the Facebook group, and I know there's a lot of interior design Facebook groups out there, and yes, I do work for Ivy and I love Ivy, and it's a software that I found once I was managing a business and none of the other softwares worked for me, but I think the other Facebook groups are great. What I think about is that's different in the Ivy Facebook group is that there's really a sense of community and people are really sharing, 1, their contracts, 2, their vendor contacts. That's huge. People go to market, they build their vendor contacts up over 10 years. People are sharing, gosh, their pricing. You're able to purchase through purchasing agents. I mean, the list goes on and on, but the knowledge that's shared, I mean, I could be running a very successful, profitable interior design business if I had had this information 5 years ago. And I think that that's what always continues to wow the designers that are in the Facebook group. It's like, whenever you have a question, like instead of like trying to hire somebody from Yelp, not that there's anything wrong with Yelp, but I like to have, like, when you're going to a restaurant, you like to know that your friend's gone to that restaurant and she highly recommends it. Same thing with Ivy. I like to use a photographer. We just had a photographer panel and somebody reached out to me and I was like, oh, like, sure, just ask in the Ivy group. There's a lot of photographers that people have used and they can give you their one-on-one advice and expertise on what photographer you're looking for and how to find that specific person rather than just searching the World Wide Web. So it's really, truly amazing. And I just think the sense of community over competition, knowing that there's enough work to go around for everybody is truly amazing.
Perfect, thank you. And another question, so I know at this time, someone had asked, can you create contracts in Ivy? And the answer is no. At this time, you can't create contracts within Ivy, but you can store contracts and other documents and attachments to specific documents within your Ivy projects. Risa, could you just show everyone how you can do that, please?
Yeah, so basically what you would do is create your contract, get it approved by your lawyer, all of that, and then you could just drop it in as an attachment right here. So I can just go to add right here and I can pull something off of my desktop. Let's just pretend this is the item. You can name it whatever. Oh, the file's too big. That's like a huge file. Okay, well, let's just pretend this is the file that I want to upload. It uploads right there. And then see right here, I can change it to, you know, Risa Eldon contract, always put the date in there, and then you can send it out right there. And so then your client would get your proposal with your contract as an attachment. Looks very streamlined and very organized.
Perfect. Perfect. That's it. I think those are the only questions we had today. Like Risa said, I'll be following up with everyone via email with the recording of this webinar and also a link to schedule a demo. We understand that each one of you has a unique business model, and Ivy can address every single one of your firm's individual needs. So we want to be able to get you on the phone and walk you through exactly how Ivy can work and support your unique business needs. So look out for my email. We will schedule a demo and get on a call and figure out how Ivy can work for you. Thank you for taking the time today to hear from us and learn more about how lighting can enhance your designs. And we are looking forward to connecting soon. And thank you, Risa.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
Bye.